The entire car industry thought it had already found the answer. Governments were pouring billions into electric vehicles. Automakers were racing to build bigger batteries. Investors were betting that gasoline engines would soon become relics of the past. Everywhere you looked, the future seemed locked in. Electric was winning, or at least that's what everyone believed. But while the world was busy chasing the same destination, one company quietly started asking a dangerous question. What if everyone was solving the wrong problem? For years, the conversation sounded simple. Replace gasoline with batteries, build more charging stations, and the transportation problem would solve itself. It was a vision that felt inevitable. Every new electric vehicle launch reinforced the idea. Every government incentive pushed consumers in the same direction. The momentum became so powerful that disagreeing with it almost sounded irrational. Yet behind closed doors, engineers at Honda were studying something most people had already dismissed. What they discovered wouldn't make headlines for years. The strange part is that Honda had never been the type of company to follow the crowd. Long before it became one of the largest automakers in the world, it was built by a man who rarely accepted conventional wisdom. Soichiro Honda wasn't a businessman first. He was an engineer obsessed with solving mechanical puzzles. When obstacles appeared, his instinct wasn't to go around them. It was to dismantle them and rebuild them from scratch. That mindset became part of Honda's DNA throughout its history. The company repeatedly found success by challenging assumptions. When stricter emission standards threatened the industry decades ago, Honda created engines many experts thought were impossible. When competitors focused on size and power, Honda found ways to make smaller engines perform beyond expectations. Again and again, they succeeded by questioning what everyone else accepted, which is why their next move caught almost nobody's attention at first. While headlines focused on electric vehicles, Honda began investing heavily in hydrogen technology. To most people, hydrogen sounded like an old idea that had already failed. It was complicated, expensive, difficult to scale, and compared to the growing excitement around EVs, it seemed hopelessly outdated. But Honda's engineers weren't looking at popularity. They were looking at limitations, and the more they studied those limitations, the more uncomfortable the questions became. Electric vehicles offered undeniable advantages. They reduced emissions while driving. They were becoming faster, quieter, and increasingly practical. But every solution introduced new challenges. Batteries required massive amounts of raw materials. Charging infrastructure demanded enormous investments. Long charging times remained inconvenient for many drivers. And as adoption increased, energy grids faced growing pressure. These weren't fatal flaws, but they were problems. And Honda couldn't stop thinking about them. Then came a decision that would define the next decade of the company's future. Instead of fully committing to the battery race, Honda decided to pursue a different path, a path almost everyone else had abandoned. At first, the gamble looked brilliant. In 2015, Honda introduced one of the most ambitious vehicles it had ever built. Unlike conventional electric cars, this vehicle generated electricity using hydrogen fuel cells. The concept seemed almost futuristic. Instead of plugging into a charger for hours, drivers could refill in minutes. Instead of producing exhaust emissions, the vehicle released only water vapor. On paper, it looked revolutionary. The technology worked. The performance impressed experts. The efficiency exceeded expectations. There was only one problem. Almost nobody bought it. And this is where the story starts to get uncomfortable. Because Honda hadn't failed due to bad engineering. It failed because the world around the technology wasn't ready. Drivers couldn't easily find hydrogen stations. Infrastructure barely existed outside a few select regions. Consumers were unfamiliar with the technology. Governments focused their support elsewhere. Meanwhile, electric vehicles continued attracting investment, attention, and momentum. The market had spoken, or so it seemed. Many companies would have walked away after a setback like that. Shareholders certainly would have understood. Analysts would have called it practical. Investors would have preferred it. Honda chose a different response. Instead of abandoning hydrogen, the company reached a conclusion that sounded almost absurd. The technology wasn't too early. The world was. That belief changed everything. Rather than chasing headlines, Honda quietly returned to development. Year after year, engineers continued refining fuel cell systems. Components became smaller. Efficiency improved. Costs slowly declined. Lessons from earlier failures shaped every new design decision. Outside observers barely noticed. Inside Honda, however, something important was happening. The company wasn't building another experiment. It was preparing for a second chance. And when that chance finally arrived, it looked very different from the first. This time, Honda wasn't trying to convince people to embrace an unfamiliar concept vehicle. Instead, it focused on something consumers already trusted: an SUV, practical, familiar, comfortable. The kind of vehicle millions of families already drove every day. But underneath that familiar appearance was a radically different idea. The new hydrogen-powered CR-V represented far more than another product launch. It was a direct challenge to the assumption that batteries alone would dominate the future. Refueling could take minutes instead of hours. Driving range could rival or exceed many electric vehicles. And unlike battery production, fuel cells required fewer of the materials increasingly associated with supply chain concerns. Suddenly, Honda's long-term gamble no longer looked quite so unrealistic. At the same time, something unexpected was happening around the world. Governments that once focused almost exclusively on electric vehicles began expanding their attention. Hydrogen projects appeared across Asia, Europe, and North America. Energy companies invested billions into production facilities. Transportation networks explored hydrogen for trucks, buses, shipping, and industrial applications. The conversation was changing. Slowly at first, then faster. The infrastructure problem that once doomed hydrogen started showing signs of improvement. And for the first time, Honda's timing appeared surprisingly good. Yet the biggest twist wasn't technological. It was philosophical. Because the real battle was never hydrogen versus electric vehicles. It was certainty versus possibility. For years, the world behaved as if a single solution would solve transportation forever. But reality rarely works that way. Different regions have different needs. Different industries face different constraints. What works perfectly for a city commuter may fail completely for long-distance freight. What succeeds in one country may struggle in another. The future was never guaranteed to belong to one technology, and Honda understood that earlier than most. Today, electric vehicles continue expanding. Battery technology continues improving. Charging networks continue growing. None of that has changed, but neither has Honda's belief. While much of the industry races in one direction, Honda continues building toward another possibility. A future where hydrogen plays a major role. A future where refueling takes minutes instead of hours. A future where clean transportation doesn't rely entirely on batteries. Whether that future arrives remains uncertain. Maybe hydrogen becomes a major pillar of global transportation. Maybe it remains a specialized solution for specific industries. Or maybe history remembers Honda's gamble as one of the boldest miscalculations in automotive history. But that's what makes this story so fascinating. Because the most important question still hasn't been answered. If the entire world is running toward one future, what happens if the company moving in a different direction turns out to be right? The answer may already be unfolding in front of us. Because while most people see hydrogen as an alternative fuel, Honda sees it as something much bigger. To them, hydrogen isn't just about replacing gasoline. It's about rethinking how energy moves through society. And once you look at it that way, the conversation becomes far more interesting. Think about what happens during a major storm. Power lines go down. Charging stations stop working. Entire neighborhoods can lose electricity for days. In a world built entirely around batteries, those moments expose a hidden vulnerability. Energy becomes trapped behind infrastructure failures. Honda noticed this problem years ago. That's one reason their newer hydrogen systems are designed to do more than power a vehicle. In certain situations, they can act as mobile energy sources, supplying electricity when it's needed most. At first glance, that sounds like a small feature. But the longer you think about it, the bigger it becomes. A car that isn't just transportation, a car that becomes part of the energy network itself. And this is where the story starts moving beyond automobiles. Because Honda's engineers began asking another uncomfortable question. What if hydrogen isn't primarily for cars? The world tends to focus on passenger vehicles because they're visible. People see them every day. They dominate headlines. But transportation is much larger than the cars parked in driveways. There are cargo trucks crossing continents, shipping vessels carrying global trade, industrial equipment operating around the clock, public transit systems moving millions of people,